Chapter 1. The Gentle Rise of the Umbrella. Hey guys. Tonight we begin with something calm, something soft, something slightly soggy. So go ahead, dim the lights, let the rain fall wherever it wants to, and let's talk about one of the most quietly revolutionary objects in Victorian London. The umbrella. Yes, the humble, squeaky, slightly embarrassing thing that every Londoner today carries like an extension of their arm. But in the 18th and early 19th centuries, it was scandalous, a social risk, practically an insult to your masculinity, and a threat to the entire British way of life. So, tuck in because tonight we're going to float, very slowly, through the drizzle and fog of Georgian and Victorian England, and see how something as harmless as a rain shelter became the height of controversy, comedy, and eventually, class fashion. Picture London in the early 1700s. The city smells like soot, beer, and wet horse. The streets are mud, real, thick, ankle-grabbing mud, and yet, somehow, everyone's pretending they're above the weather. Back then, men didn't carry umbrellas. They carried canes because canes were dignified. They showed that you were a gentleman who didn't need shelter. If it rained, you simply walked faster. Maybe you cursed under your breath. But you didn't open a delicate silk canopy like some French poet. Women, on the other hand, could occasionally get away with parasols, but those were for sun, not rain. Rain was the great equalizer. It fell on everyone, rich or poor, and the only people visibly trying to avoid it were coachmen holding huge leather contraptions over their employers. And even those were called portable roofs, not umbrellas. Because, of course, the French word was just a little too continental. Enter Jonas Hanway. He's the man who, depending on who you ask, either invented British umbrella culture or nearly got run over trying. Jonas was a philanthropist, a bit of a traveler, and definitely the kind of man who would insist on being right even while soaked to the bone. He'd spent time in Persia, seen people using umbrellas there, and thought, why not England? Why should I be drenched just to prove my moral fiber? So in the 1750s, he started walking around London with an umbrella. It was blue. It was sturdy. It was also, according to witnesses, the most ridiculous sight imaginable. Londoners jeered. Hackney coachmen shouted insults at him because umbrellas threatened their business. Fewer wet people meant fewer desperate rides home. Kids followed him down the street, chanting. One shopkeeper supposedly refused to serve him because no man should be seen hiding from heaven's rain. And yet, Jonas kept doing it. For 30 years. 30. Imagine that level of quiet, umbrella-related defiance. By the time he died in 1786, Jonas Hanway had turned into something of a local curiosity, part eccentric, part pioneer. People still mocked him, but slowly his habit caught on. And like most things that start as jokes, umbrellas began to evolve. At first, they were clunky oiled canvas, wooden ribs, brass fittings heavy enough to fend off a burglar. Carrying one was like hauling a small ship's mast. But manufacturers started experimenting. Silk for the wealthy, whalebone for the adventurous. By the early 1800s, umbrellas were creeping into polite society, though not without scandal. One newspaper of the time wrote that a man seen with an umbrella is a man who has forsaken nature. Which, frankly, sounds like something shouted by someone already half-soaked. And then came the Victorians. Oh, the Victorians. The masters of taking a simple idea and turning it into a moral statement. For them, the umbrella wasn't just a rain cover. It was a symbol of respectability, a badge of preparedness. If you were seen without one, you might as well have arrived barefoot and swearing. By the mid-19th century, London's skyline was a forest of umbrellas. The city had gone from laughing at them to practically worshipping them. Department stores like Jeeves and Company and Fox's were producing them in polished wood, silver, even ivory handles. Gentlemen had walking stick umbrellas, because God forbid you look too delicate. Women had lace-trimmed ones that looked more like props from a romantic painting than weather tools. Even children were gifted miniature parasols. Though, given Victorian parenting, those were probably more for discipline than comfort. What's funny is how fast public opinion flipped. A generation earlier, men mocked umbrella users as cowards. Now, if you didn't carry one, you were seen as reckless. maybe even a little vulgar. Umbrellas became part of the Victorian moral code, up there with punctuality, modesty, and having a firm handshake. And yet, despite the obsession, there was still something faintly absurd about it all. Because for all their moral posturing, Victorians hated being seen as vain. So, they insisted that the umbrella was practical, never fashionable, even when theirs were carved with mother-of-pearl handles and monogrammed initials. The more ornate it got, the more they denied caring about it. Classic Victorian logic. Yes, my umbrella has an inlaid silver handle shaped like a lion's head, but it's purely functional. Let's float a little further into that damp, foggy world. By 1850, London had become the umbrella capital of Europe. Not Paris, not Milan, not Vienna, London. The city where it rained too much for pride to survive. Umbrella makers were turning into celebrities of sorts. Samuel Fox, for instance, who invented the steel-ribbed frame in 1852, basically gave birth to the modern umbrella. It was lighter, more durable, and less likely to collapse dramatically in the middle of Piccadilly. Fox called it the Paragon, which, honestly, sounds like the name of a superhero weapon, not a rain accessory. And Victorians adored it. The Paragon umbrella became the must-have item of the middle class. Practical, dignified, unbreakable, just like they wanted to be. Even Queen Victoria had one, trimmed with silk and black lace. Because of course she did. Umbrellas even made their way into etiquette guides. You were advised never to open one indoors, that superstition stuck, never to carry a wet one into a drawing room, and never, under any circumstances, to share one with someone of the opposite sex unless you were engaged. Apparently, the intimacy of shared dryness was too scandalous. It sounds absurd now, but to the Victorians it made sense. Everything had layers of propriety, even weather protection. Some moralists even claimed the umbrella represented the triumph of civilization over nature, as if sheltering from drizzle was an act of divine progress. And in a weird way, the umbrella was more than just fabric and ribs. It was a symbol of control in a world full of chaos, soot, and rainwater running down your collar. But of course, there was also comedy. Victorian cartoonists loved mocking the new umbrella mania. Punch magazine, the era's master of social satire, drew endless sketches of pompous gentlemen struggling with inverted umbrellas, or crowds of commuters poking each other in the eyes on narrow streets. At it there were even umbrella duels, verbal ones, thankfully, over whose was more refined, or whether a man's umbrella handle was too feminine. And then there was the great irony. As umbrellas became status symbols, they also became theft magnets. By the 1870s, umbrella snatching was so common that police records actually listed stolen umbrellas as a separate category of property crime. There were umbrella repair shops, umbrella lending services, and even umbrella pawn shops, the saddest of all possible establishments. Imagine pawning your umbrella because rent was due. That's peak Victorian melancholy. Still, umbrellas weren't just for the rich anymore. Factory workers, office clerks, shop assistants, they all wanted one. It was the ultimate middle-class badge. A man with an umbrella looked like he was going somewhere. London streets, once filled with muddy chaos, now became a rhythmic parade of umbrellas, black, orderly, polite. Like the weather itself had been tamed. Of course, it hadn't. It was still raining sideways half the time. But now, people could pretend otherwise. And so, what began as a scandal, as a symbol of weakness, became one of England's proudest accessories. Jonas Hanway's ghost must have been grinning somewhere, watching all those men sneer under the same umbrellas they once mocked him for. It's almost poetic. The man who was jeered for 30 years ended up changing how an entire country dressed for rain. That's the British way, really. Resist an idea for as long as possible, then quietly claim it as tradition. So tonight, as we settle deeper into this gentle drizzle of history, think about that. Every time someone pops open an umbrella on a London street, they're part of a centuries-long ritual of pride, embarrassment, and reluctant practicality. It's an object that tells a story, not of invention, but of stubbornness giving way to common sense. And in Victorian London, that story would only get stranger. Because soon, umbrellas weren't just about keeping dry, They became about who you were, your class, your manners, even your political views. But that's for the next chapter. For now, let's just stay here a little longer, in the fog, under the slow rhythm of rain tapping on silk and steel, and remember how the most ordinary object in London once caused an uproar loud enough to echo through history. Chapter 2: Umbrellas and the Victorian Class Code. By the mid-1800s, the umbrella had become something far more complicated than a rain shelter. It was, quite unintentionally, a mirror, one that reflected the layers of social order the Victorians loved to stack upon themselves. Everyone carried them, but not everyone carried them the same way. There were umbrellas of power, umbrellas of pretension, umbrellas of poverty disguised as politeness. And like everything in Victorian society, even a small object could reveal everything about you, from your income to your respectability, to whether you were the sort of person who'd be trusted to sit in the front pew at church. The upper classes, for instance, treated the umbrella as an accessory, a tasteful, understated symbol of control. A gentleman's umbrella was sleek, black, and heavy. Its handle, ideally, was made from polished malacca cane or carved ivory. And of course, it had to match the walking stick he sometimes carried instead. He didn't need to open it often, because he usually had a coach. But the mere act of owning one was what mattered. It said, "I am prepared for rain, but I prefer not to mingle with it." Meanwhile, the middle classes approached the umbrella like a moral obligation. To the Victorians, being respectable meant being predictable. And nothing was more predictable than carrying an umbrella in London, where the sky seemed to change moods 5 times a day. Middle-class etiquette books even gave advice on umbrella decorum. One writer insisted that a gentleman's umbrella must never be of gaudy hue. Another warned that if a man carried a parasol-style umbrella, heaven forbid, it might lead to misapprehensions of his character. Translation: don't look French, don't look feminine, and don't look like you're enjoying yourself. Women faced a similar rulebook. Their umbrellas had to strike a delicate balance, refined enough to show taste, but not so ornate as to seem vain. Too plain and you looked poor. Too fancy and you looked scandalous. It was a sort of aesthetic tightrope, one only the Victorians could invent, where you could be judged for both caring too much and not caring enough about rain protection. Servants and laborers, on the other hand, were late to the umbrella party, partly because of cost, partly because of image. A decent umbrella could cost a week's wages for a domestic worker, and walking around with one might seem pretentious. There was even a social danger in appearing too respectable. A butler with an umbrella might look like he was trying to imitate his employer, and nothing horrified Victorians more than class imitation. So for the working poor, the umbrella became a quiet aspiration. They might not own one, but they dreamed of it, the same way they dreamed of Sunday suits, polished shoes, or a small patch of garden behind a rented house. By 1860, pawn shops were full of umbrellas, some pristine, some broken, all tangled up in the endless loop of Victorian economics. Bought, sold, pawned, redeemed, lost again. Even the way you carried your umbrella mattered. A gentleman was expected to hold it under his arm when closed, handle forward, like a sword. A lady was advised to carry hers at a discreet tilt to avoid drawing attention. And absolutely no one, under any circumstances, was to wave one around or use it as a pointer during conversation. That was vulgar. Of course, real life didn't always follow the etiquette books. Umbrellas were constantly involved in accidental duels on crowded sidewalks. They tangled in horse reins, poked through shop windows, and occasionally knocked hats clean off. There were entire newspaper columns dedicated to umbrella etiquette violations, the 19th century version of angry tweets. Then came the curious rise of the umbrella gentleman. He wasn't aristocratic, nor quite middle class. He was part of that gray, expanding category of Victorian clerkdom, the bookkeepers, telegraph operators, insurance assistants, and bank clerks who filled the new white-collar world. These were men defined by respectability rather than wealth. Their pay was modest, but their pride was enormous. And the umbrella in their hands became a badge of that fragile self-respect. You could walk into a city office in the 1860s and instantly identify the clerks, the neat suits, the serious expressions, and the identical black umbrellas leaning in the corner. It was said that no true London clerk would be caught without one. It wasn't just a tool, it was an identity. Cartoonists adored this stereotype. In Punch and other satirical papers, clerks were often drawn with one hand clutching an umbrella and the other a small briefcase, the twin symbols of tedious modernity. They were always polite, always damp, and always slightly ridiculous. The umbrella, once an eccentric scandal, had become shorthand for mediocrity. And yet, Victorians couldn't help themselves. They loved it. It was safe, predictable. It said, I'm doing exactly what I should be doing, nothing more, nothing less. For a society obsessed with order, that was perfection. Umbrellas also became part of London's physical landscape. By the 1870s, entire streets were devoted to umbrella makers and repairers. Shops displayed them like jewels, some plain, others inlaid with mother-of-pearl or tortoiseshell. Advertisements promised gentleman-proof frames and unflappable whalebone construction. Umbrella stands appeared in every respectable home, tall, ornate, usually near the door, filled with neatly arranged canes and parasols. It was one of those tiny household details that screamed middle-class virtue. You might not own much, but by God, you had a proper umbrella stand. And then, of course, came the symbolism. Victorians could turn anything into a moral metaphor, and the umbrella was no exception. Writers compared it to faith, something that shields one from the storms of life. Preachers used it as a visual aid in sermons about modesty and prudence. Some moralists even argued that children should be given small umbrellas as lessons in responsibility, a sort of portable conscience with a handle. It sounds absurd now, but that was the Victorian genius, turning daily inconveniences into moral parables. Meanwhile, London's weather refused to cooperate. Umbrellas broke, inverted, and were carried off by sudden gusts like doomed balloons. But rather than question the design, Victorians doubled down. There was a quiet stoicism in their persistence, that strange British ability to turn suffering into a virtue. If your umbrella snapped in half, you didn't complain. You just muttered something about cheap manufacturing and bought another one. Rain was inevitable. Misfortune was character building. And the umbrella, in its fragile dignity, was the perfect companion to both. By the late Victorian era, umbrellas had even entered politics. Politicians carried them as props, symbols of steady, middle-class values. Cartoonists mocked prime ministers for hiding under umbrellas of compromise. When Neville Chamberlain, decades later, famously waved his umbrella after returning from Munich, it was no coincidence. He was appealing to that long, deeply ingrained image of English decency. But even before him, the umbrella had already taken root in the national psyche. It was no longer just an object. It was England itself, cautious, polite, slightly absurd, and always prepared for rain. Not everyone was impressed, of course. Writers like Oscar Wilde saw the umbrella as the ultimate symbol of conformity. He once joked that a man who carries an umbrella on a sunny day is capable of anything. And he wasn't wrong. Umbrellas had become a moral compass of sorts, one that pointed unerringly toward the middle ground. To be without one was bohemian. To carry one was bourgeois. To collect them was just a little sad. Still, the umbrella endured, because it fit perfectly into the rhythm of Victorian life. London was expanding. Streets were filling with commuters. Factories belched out smoke that mixed with rain into a kind of industrial drizzle. The umbrella was both shield and statement, an admission that the modern world was messy but manageable. Even the sound of them became part of the city, the tapping on pavements, the rustle of silk, the slow drip into gutter water. It was, in a way, the heartbeat of a rainy empire. There's also a kind of quiet comedy in how Victorians romanticized even the saddest umbrella scenes. Painters loved depicting ladies in bonnets under misty skies, holding delicate parasols that clearly wouldn't stop a single raindrop. Poets wrote about lovers sharing an umbrella, always symbolic, always tragic. It was never about staying dry. It was about propriety under pressure, grace in gloom, restraint in weather. The umbrella became art, manners, and moral metaphor all at once. And yet, underneath all that symbolism, the umbrella still carried a faint echo of its origins. A memory of that one stubborn man, Jonas Hanway, who refused to walk drenched. Victorians might not have remembered his name, but they inherited his defiance, in their own buttoned-up way. They took his rebellion and polished it into respectability. Every open umbrella in London was, in some small way, a tribute to the stubbornness of common sense over custom. By the end of the 19th century, umbrellas were everywhere. Railway stations had umbrella racks. Theaters had umbrella attendants. Shops sold tiny folding ones for travelers, though most of those collapsed after a single gust of wind. There were even lost umbrella offices, special departments for reuniting thousands of abandoned umbrellas with their owners. One estimate claimed that by 1895, London lost over 10,000 umbrellas a year. You can almost imagine the scene. A gray Monday morning, hundreds of men marching through puddles, clutching umbrellas that weren't theirs, but close enough. And so, the object that once symbolized weakness had become a national uniform. A man with an umbrella was proper. A man without one was suspect. Rain or shine, the rule held. It was, in its quiet absurdity, the perfect Victorian story, a tale of pride, practicality, and the constant human urge to turn the simplest things into moral theater. The Victorians might not have realized it, but their love affair with the umbrella said more about them than any speech or sermon. It showed their fear of disorder, their obsession with respectability, and their desperate need to look calm even while drenched. Because beneath all the starch and etiquette, Victorian London was still a place of puddles, of imperfect cobblestones, splashing horses, and umbrellas that never quite worked. And maybe that's why they loved them. Not because umbrellas solved the problem, but because they gave the illusion that problems could be solved, elegantly, quietly, one drizzle at a time. Chapter 3: Umbrellas, Fashion, and the Empire's Drizzle Aesthetic. By the 1880s, the umbrella had stopped being an object of debate. It was a fact of life, as essential to existence as tea, fog, and complaining about both. But that didn't mean it stayed humble. In typical Victorian fashion, once the moral panic faded, they decided to make umbrellas beautiful. Because, naturally, practicality was never enough. If a thing existed, it had to be improved, decorated, classified, and discussed at dinner parties until everyone regretted bringing it up. The Industrial Revolution, that noisy miracle of soot and gears, had given birth to new manufacturing techniques, and that included umbrella production. Steel ribs had replaced whalebone, waterproof fabrics were cheaper, and machine-made parts made them accessible to nearly everyone. And once something becomes affordable, fashion quickly takes over. Department stores like Harrods, Swan and Edgar, and Marshall and Snellgrove sold umbrellas by the dozens. Glossy advertisements in women's magazines described the latest Parisian rain shades, with handles of carved ebony or silver-plated knobs shaped like dogs, serpents, or occasionally Queen Victoria's own face. Umbrella shopping became an act of self-expression, which, for Victorians, was a dangerous hobby. Ladies' umbrellas were the most elaborate. They came in lace, silk, brocade, or delicate cotton, frilled, scalloped, embroidered with flowers or initials. Many were so fragile that they'd collapse if you looked at them too sternly. But they weren't designed to survive the weather. They were designed to show that you didn't really have to deal with it. To carry a lace-trimmed umbrella through the drizzle of London was, in a way, an act of defiance. A statement that one's life did not involve manual labor, mud, or rushing to catch the omnibus. And so, the umbrella became part of the language of class, again. Of course, men got their share of vanity too. Though male fashion was famously restrained, the same somber palette of black, gray, and maybe a nervous navy, the umbrella offered a rare outlet for personality. A man might not dare to wear a bright tie, but he could own an umbrella with a handle carved into a lion's head or a serpent winding up the shaft. He could carry a piece of art disguised as a tool. Collectors emerged, quiet, respectable men who would never call themselves collectors, but who nevertheless owned half a dozen umbrellas for various occasions. There was the city umbrella, the country umbrella, the funeral umbrella, and the one too fine to use at all. Umbrellas became heirlooms, sometimes engraved with initials, or family mottos like "steady under all weather," which, frankly, was just a very British way of saying we tolerate everything badly. As with all things Victorian, there was also a moral side to fashion. Writers reminded women that overly decorated umbrellas signaled vanity. They warned men that flashy designs hinted at continental influence. The safest umbrella, etiquette books declared, was black, well-kept, and used sparingly. It was one of those objects that could elevate you socially or quietly condemn you, depending on how you held it. If you twirled it, frivolous. If you leaned on it, lazy. If you used it as a pointer, intolerable. But if you carried it upright at a proper angle with restrained dignity, then congratulations, you were civilized. Umbrellas also began showing up in art. Painters like Gustave Caillebotte in France and John Atkinson Grimshaw in Britain turned rainy streets into visual poetry. Figures under umbrellas became symbols of modern life. Detached, respectable, endlessly walking towards something vague in the fog. Grimshaw's works in particular, all gas lamps and glistening cobbles, captured that peculiar romance of Victorian reign, melancholy but orderly. People under umbrellas never looked desperate, just quietly resigned. In literature, too, the umbrella became shorthand for Englishness. Writers like Dickens and Trollope used it as a character detail, a prop that said more about a person than dialogue ever could. A man who forgot his umbrella was forgetful. A man who carried two was fussy. A man who borrowed one and didn't return it, morally bankrupt. It was social symbolism wrapped in waterproof fabric. And then came the Empire. The British Empire, stretching across the globe, managed to export not only its railways and bureaucracy, but also its peculiar love for umbrellas. They turned up in India, in Hong Kong, in the African colonies, partly for the rain, mostly for the sun, and entirely for appearances. Colonial officials posed for photographs with pith helmets in one hand and umbrellas in the other, as though they were shielding themselves not from weather, but from the chaos of the world. In India, the umbrella, or chhatri, long used by locals, took on a strange new life. British administrators insisted theirs were superior, sturdier, more civilized. Meanwhile, the locals smiled politely, knowing they'd been using umbrellas for centuries before London even stopped laughing at them. But empire is built on irony, and so the umbrella, once mocked as effeminate, became an emblem of imperial authority, a portable dome of order beneath which the British stood dry and self-satisfied. Of course, the colonies gave something back: color. Eastern markets flooded London with patterned silks and bamboo handles. Umbrellas began to incorporate exotic materials: tortoiseshell, ivory from Africa, mother of pearl from Ceylon. Each piece whispered of faraway rain and imperial trade. To own one wasn't just to stay dry. It was to carry a fragment of the empire in your hand. There was, however, an unspoken discomfort in that. While Londoners admired their imported silk canopies, the labor that produced them, the weaving, the carving, the shipping, belonged to unseen colonial hands. But Victorians preferred not to dwell on such details. A polite society doesn't like to see the mud under its polished boots. In public life, the umbrella even became a mark of leadership, or, occasionally, cowardice. Caricatures often showed cautious politicians cowering under umbrellas while the brave few marched into metaphorical storms. The phrase, "umbrella man," came to mean someone overly cautious, unwilling to take risks. At the same time, police officers carried large, black umbrellas on patrol, using them as walking sticks, shields, or in moments of comic desperation, makeshift weapons. Street preachers held them aloft as moral symbols. Even beggars were known to prop open broken umbrellas, hoping pity would fall faster than the rain. The umbrella had become universal, from palace to pavement, from sermon to satire. And of course, there were scandals. Theft, always rampant, took on more inventive forms. Umbrella exchange was the polite term, leaving your broken one in a rack and taking someone else's in better condition. It was a social sin everyone condemned and everyone committed. One London magistrate in 1884 reportedly handled an entire day's docket of nothing but umbrella disputes, each plaintiff more indignant than the last. One man claimed emotional distress after losing his paragon of 7 ribs. Another demanded financial compensation for a handle of sentimental ivory. It was absurd, but perfectly Victorian, outrage over the trivial, wrapped in the language of dignity. Fashion eventually met technology. By the 1890s, folding umbrellas had entered the scene. Smaller, lighter, allegedly convenient. They were immediately distrusted. Traditionalists sneered at their flimsy design, claiming that no gentleman would stoop to a collapsible contraption. But younger Londoners loved them. They could fit into handbags or briefcases, ideal for the city's growing army of commuters. It was the beginning of a quiet cultural shift, from the grand ornamental umbrella of the Victorian gentleman to the practical, democratic umbrella of the modern commuter. The kind that broke easily, but could be replaced just as easily. And that really was the future approaching. Cheaper, faster, less sentimental. Still, in the heart of late Victorian London, the umbrella remained what it had always been. An emblem of calm defiance against a world that refused to stay dry. It was there in the parks, shading pale faces during summer concerts. It was there in funerals, black against gray skies, as mourners shuffled past with solemn precision. It was there in the hands of lovers, who stood just a little too close under one narrow canopy, pretending not to notice. It was always there, the quiet companion of every kind of British emotion, from grief to awkward courtship. And if you look at old photographs of London, you'll see them everywhere. Rows of black umbrellas marching down wet streets like soldiers. Reflections in puddles, smudged silhouettes beneath gaslight. Even in moments of joy, parades, coronations, fairs, someone, somewhere, was holding one aloft. It's as if the city itself couldn't be imagined without them. The umbrella had ceased to be a novelty and become part of London's anatomy, ribs and fabric stitched into its rainy soul. In a way, that's what made it beautiful. Not its design, or its material, or even its purpose, but its constancy. The umbrella endured when fashions changed, when empires rose and fell, when horses gave way to trams and trams to motorcars. It was the same old canopy under 1,000 new storms. And perhaps that's why Victorians loved it so fiercely. Because beneath all their pomp and moral posturing, they were a people obsessed with permanence, with the illusion that something, anything, could be made stable in a world that was always shifting. The umbrella gave them that illusion. A fragile dome against chaos. A bit of order in a climate that refused to cooperate. And so, by the end of the 19th century, the umbrella was no longer just a fashion statement. It was an identity, a national one. To be British was, in some quiet way, to live beneath an umbrella. Dignified, cautious, quietly enduring the drizzle with a sigh and a sense of superiority. The rest of the world might laugh, but they didn't understand. The umbrella wasn't just about rain. It was about being prepared for disappointment, for inconvenience, for everything life chose to pour down unexpectedly. And in that, perhaps, there was a strange wisdom. Because while other nations looked to the stars, the Victorians looked to the clouds, and decided to bring something practical. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Umbrella Gentleman. By the mid-19th century, London had fallen completely under the spell of the umbrella. It had gone from an eccentric novelty to something close to a social requirement. Streets once filled with top hats and canes were now bristling with the rhythmic bob of folded parasols. It was the golden age of what could only be described as umbrella etiquette, which, yes, was somehow a real thing people debated. Umbrellas were no longer just tools, they were moral indicators. A man's umbrella said things about his class, his income, and apparently his ability to control himself in public. There were specific postures to holding one, angled politely when walking past a lady, tilted just so to avoid splashing mud. If this all sounds excessive, but it was Victorian London, where everything from your hat size to your walking stick placement was apparently a test of moral fiber. Let's float over to a particularly fascinating type of Londoner, the umbrella gentleman. These were men who didn't just use umbrellas. They performed them. In the heart of Oxford Street or along the Strand, you might spot one of them strolling with his umbrella tucked under his arm as if it were a saber. He'd open it with a flourish in the lightest drizzle, often before a single drop had even hit the pavement. It was an act of confidence, a declaration that he was a man of the modern world. Umbrella gentlemen were often caricatured in satirical magazines like Punch. Artists loved mocking the sight of otherwise rugged Victorian men delicately carrying these dainty, fabric-covered contraptions. There were cartoons of men fencing with umbrellas, tripping over them, and even using them as makeshift fishing rods. But mockery, as it often does, only made the fashion stronger. The umbrella had become such an integral part of the masculine silhouette that even those who ridiculed it couldn't go without it. And then there was the issue of ownership. Umbrellas were valuable. They weren't cheap, especially the fancy ones made with carved ivory handles or silk canopies. So, as you might imagine, umbrella theft became a minor epidemic. There were Londoners who, quite literally, specialized in stealing umbrellas. A man might leave his at the corner of a coffee house or a gentleman's club, only to emerge half an hour later to find it mysteriously vanished. And since every umbrella looked vaguely similar, the theft was almost impossible to prove. There were even jokes that the British weather existed purely to keep the umbrella thieves in business. To counter this, Victorians began marking their umbrellas with initials or discreet engravings. Some umbrella makers advertised anti-theft models, whatever that meant. A few even developed what they claimed were secret opening mechanisms, which sounds a bit like the 1850s version of facial recognition. Still, umbrellas continued to disappear at alarming rates. It got so bad that certain London clubs started keeping communal umbrellas at the door, just so members could borrow one without fear of losing their own. But while the upper class was busy personalizing their umbrellas, the working class had begun embracing them for far more practical reasons. The rise of factory work and long commutes meant people were spending more time outdoors in unpredictable weather. Cheap, mass-produced umbrellas, thanks to industrialization, flooded the markets by the 1860s. For the first time, even a factory worker could own a decent umbrella. It wasn't silk or ivory, of course. It was more likely made of oiled cotton and steel ribs. But it worked, and that was what mattered. Interestingly, this democratization of the umbrella caused a strange form of class anxiety. The middle and upper classes suddenly found themselves sharing umbrella space with the masses. What had once been a sign of refinement now risked becoming, well, common. To compensate, wealthier Londoners doubled down on design and extravagance. There were umbrellas with built-in walking sticks, hidden compartments for love letters, and even concealed blades, because apparently the Victorians couldn't resist turning everything into a potential weapon. Of course, these ornate umbrellas weren't meant for actual combat. They were for display. They told the world, I have money, taste, and possibly a mild superiority complex. Some gentlemen went so far as to match their umbrella handles to their cufflinks. It was that serious. Meanwhile, umbrella shops became neighborhood landmarks. There were entire storefronts dedicated to umbrellas, racks upon racks of them displayed in elegant windows. The most fashionable ladies and gentlemen could spend hours choosing just the right one. And the shopkeepers? They became minor celebrities in their own right. The best ones knew exactly how to read their clientele, who wanted to make a statement, who wanted to blend in, and who just wanted something sturdy enough to survive another London downpour. But for all the refinement and class signaling, umbrellas still had a comical side. London was crowded, and navigating a busy street while dozens of umbrellas flared open at once was a logistical nightmare. Collisions were constant. People poked each other in the face. There were etiquette manuals reminding citizens to raise your umbrella on the right side when passing and close your umbrella when entering crowded thoroughfares. Because apparently, the Victorians needed instruction for even the simplest tasks. And yet, the umbrella persisted as a symbol of polite restraint, something quintessentially British. It was both a barrier against the weather and, metaphorically, against emotional exposure. Rain could pour, wind could howl, but under one's neat canopy, order remained. Everything was proper. Everything was dry. By the late Victorian era, the umbrella had evolved beyond mere practicality. It was part of Britain's national image, reserved, composed, slightly absurd, but deeply reliable. The kind of object you could mock endlessly and yet never truly live without. Let's drift onward now to the ladies of the age who would turn umbrellas and parasols into something far more than weather protection, into tools of flirtation, fashion, and quiet rebellion. Chapter 5. Parasols, Petticoats, and Polite Rebellions. By the time London's gentlemen had turned umbrellas into symbols of industrial masculinity, the city's women were waging their own quieter revolution, one that came wrapped in lace, ribbons, and pastel silk. The parasol, delicate cousin of the umbrella, had been around for centuries, of course. But in Victorian London, it became something altogether new, part fashion statement, part social shield, and part weapon in the ongoing war between propriety and personal freedom. The Victorian woman was expected to be delicate, pale, and ever so slightly ornamental, like a porcelain figurine that occasionally spoke. And since sunlight was the mortal enemy of pale skin, parasols became the unofficial badge of femininity. A woman without one was practically declaring social anarchy. The tanless, faintly glowing complexion of upper-class women wasn't achieved through luxury creams. It was achieved by a near-religious devotion to shade. The parasol was less a tool and more a halo of status. And oh, the variety! Silk canopies trimmed with lace. Carved ivory handles shaped like swans, serpents, or flowers. Some were embroidered with family crests, others painted with delicate floral scenes. For the fashionable elite, a parasol was as essential as a corset, and probably just as uncomfortable to manage in public. Women carried them not just to block the sun, but to be seen blocking it. Of course, as with all things Victorian, there were rules. One could not simply open or close a parasol without grace. Manuals of etiquette instructed ladies to raise their parasols slowly, with measured elegance, and never during conversation, lest it appear abrupt or rude. Lowering a parasol too quickly might be interpreted as a sign of irritation, or worse, flirtation. And flirtation, naturally, required its own entire sublanguage of parasol gestures. Yes, there was a code. The parasol language, as it was sometimes called in ladies' magazines, allowed women to express things they could never say aloud in polite society. Twirling the handle slowly meant, "I wish to make your acquaintance." Tapping it lightly on the shoulder implied disapproval. Resting it on the left shoulder might say, "You may speak to me," while closing it suddenly could mean, "Please go away immediately." It was a world of veiled intentions and silent rebellion, social choreography performed in lace and sunlight. Let's float gently now to Hyde Park, sometime in the 1870s. It's a warm spring afternoon, and the serpentine glitters with the kind of lazy shimmer that makes one forget about the city's soot and smells. The park is filled with strolling couples, chattering families, and women in every possible shade of pastel, each one holding a parasol like a scepter. It's a sea of fabric and fluttering fans, a perfectly orchestrated performance of leisure. Yet beneath the ribbons and restraint, things were quietly shifting. The same object that symbolized gentility was also beginning to represent independence. Middle-class women, the ones who didn't have the luxury of idleness, started carrying parasols not just for fashion, but for practicality. They walked unchaperoned more often, took the tram, went shopping, visited galleries. And when a woman walked alone, her parasol was more than shade. It was a companion, a kind of shield from unwanted gazes or overzealous suitors. Newspapers of the era were full of tongue-in-cheek stories about women using parasols to fend off advances, and sometimes, quite literally, to swat away trouble. A well-aimed parasol jab was a socially acceptable defense. No gentleman could accuse a lady of rudeness when she was simply adjusting her parasol. Manufacturers caught on to the trend, of course. By the 1880s, advertisements promised parasols that were both stylish and sturdy, with stronger ribs and reinforced handles, perfect for, well, unexpected circumstances. Some even included retractable points or weighted tips, making them ideal for self-defense in crowded London streets. It's not hard to imagine a prim Victorian lady, all ruffles and politeness, holding what was essentially a dainty club disguised in lace. Meanwhile, the upper classes continued their parasol one-upmanship. Designers outdid each other with absurd innovations: double canopies for extra shade, telescoping handles, even parasols with mirrors built into the underside so one could discreetly check her hair. There were parasols that could fold into a fan, parasols that doubled as perfume holders, and even one that reportedly played a tiny music box tune when opened. The Victorians were never ones to let good taste stop them. Yet, as the century turned, the parasol's status began to fade, not overnight, but gradually, with the same melancholy slowness that marked most Victorian transitions. Sunlight, once feared, became fashionable again. A bronzed complexion started to suggest health, travel, vitality, all the things the industrial middle class aspired to. By the 1890s, younger women were increasingly seen walking bareheaded, unbothered by freckles or faint tans. The parasol, once a statement of grace, was turning into a relic of their mother's generation. Still, in its quiet way, the parasol had done its work. It had given women a small, symbolic tool of autonomy in a society that preferred them passive. Under its shade, they conversed freely, walked alone, and even, occasionally, stood up for themselves, parasol in hand. In the annals of history, it's easy to overlook such a small object. But in the slow swirl of Victorian life, the parasol was more than silk and spokes. It was a soft rebellion, a lace-edged act of defiance carried out in plain sight, under the polite pretense of keeping one's complexion. Let's drift onward to another corner of London now, where the umbrella became something quite different once again. Less fashion, more necessity. The age of urban crowds, railway stations, and smoky London fog was about to turn the humble umbrella into an object of modern survival. Chapter 6: Fog, Factories, and the Everyday Umbrella. As the 19th century marched toward its smoggy finale, London itself was becoming something entirely new, a heaving, breathing organism of soot, steam, and ceaseless motion. Trains thundered in and out of the city like mechanical beasts, factories belched smoke over rooftops, and the air took on a damp, metallic taste that clung to one's clothes for days. And in this brave new industrial world, the umbrella found its truest calling, not as a symbol of elegance or rebellion, but as sheer, practical survival. By the 1880s, London had perfected the art of unpleasant weather. The fog wasn't just mist, it was a living thing, a yellow-brown haze so thick it could swallow entire streets. Locals called it pea soup. Poets called it romantic. Doctors, less poetically, called it a respiratory hazard. But whatever you called it, it meant one thing: the umbrella was no longer optional. It was essential equipment, as much a part of urban life as the bowler hat or the omnibus. Factories and railways had democratized the umbrella completely. Gone were the days when only the wealthy flaunted silk canopies and ivory handles. Industrial manufacturing meant umbrellas could now be made cheaply, quickly, and by the thousands. The steel ribs that had once been expensive imports were now produced domestically, and the new waterproof fabrics, often coated with paraffin or rubber, made them sturdier than ever. A man could buy a decent umbrella on nearly any street corner. Small shops, railway kiosks, even tobacco sellers stocked them. And though they might lack the dainty charm of a parasol, they had something far better: reliability. They opened when you needed them, mostly. They didn't turn inside out with the first gust, usually. And they could be folded and tucked under the arm, ready for whatever mysterious fluid the sky decided to drop next. But if you imagine Londoners strolling calmly through this foggy wonderland, picture again. The city was chaos, horse-drawn carriages crashing through the mist, vendors shouting, trains shrieking, and umbrellas colliding like dueling swords. Newspapers were full of complaints about umbrella congestion, especially on narrow pavements. People bumped, jabbed, and dripped on one another constantly. Satirical writers had a field day. Umbrellas became the punchline of every urban irritation. Punch magazine described them as the natural enemy of the eye, and others referred to them as the scourge of public walkways. One writer even proposed a licensing system, that no man should be allowed to wield an umbrella without a certificate proving he could do so safely. It was, in fairness, a solid idea. Despite the chaos, the umbrella's reputation as a symbol of composure persisted. Even in the worst fog, a true Londoner prided himself on maintaining dignity, dry, upright, and only mildly annoyed. The umbrella became shorthand for resilience, for that peculiarly British brand of politeness that somehow survives even when visibility is down to 3 feet. There's something faintly comic about it, really. Imagine trudging through knee-deep puddles while clutching a leaking umbrella, your shoes soaked, your hat dripping, but still nodding politely to strangers as though you were attending tea. That was London. And of course, the umbrella had its darker associations too. In a city where anonymity reigned, an umbrella could conceal as much as it revealed. Fog and darkness provided excellent cover, and detectives of the era were keenly aware of what an umbrella could hide. There are scattered records of umbrellas used to smuggle contraband, conceal weapons, or simply disguise one's appearance. Fiction followed suit. By the late Victorian era, crime novels were full of mysterious gentlemen in black coats, their faces half hidden under dark umbrellas. But perhaps the most enduring figure of all was the umbrella salesman, the unsung hero of the damp metropolis. These vendors, often stationed near railway stations or street corners, hawked their wares with the energy of prophets. They were the first to sense approaching rain, sometimes minutes before the first drop. "Rain coming, sir?" they'd call out, flourishing a folded umbrella like a magician producing a dove. And somehow, even when the sky looked clear, people bought them, because in London, it was never not about to rain. Even Queen Victoria herself had embraced the practicality of the umbrella. Her private diaries mention them frequently, though not always kindly. She was reportedly unimpressed by how easily they tore or bent, and she considered carrying one ungraceful. But she kept several nonetheless, which feels perfectly in character. By her later years, the Queen had come to embody the umbrella's spirit, stern, practical, and slightly weather-beaten. And then there were the workers, the everyday Londoners who trudged through soot and drizzle on their way to and from the factories. Their umbrellas were not elegant accessories but survival gear. They dried them by the hearth at night, patched them with scraps of oilcloth, and carried them until they fell apart. For them, the umbrella wasn't a fashion statement or a class symbol. It was just what you needed to get through another miserable morning in the city. In a way, it's almost poetic how this fragile, flimsy object came to represent endurance. The umbrella was an admission of vulnerability, a small act of defiance against forces far beyond control. You couldn't stop the fog, or the grime, or the endless drizzle, but you could hold a canopy over your head and pretend, just for a moment, that you were winning. By the time the century closed, the umbrella had fully merged with London's identity. To imagine the city without it was unthinkable. It belonged as much to the streets as the lampposts and the gaslight. And though fashions would change, industries would rise and fall, and empires would crumble, one thing would remain true: London would always be a city under umbrellas. Let's drift, now, to the turn of the century, when the modern world arrived with trains, telegraphs, and tailcoats, and when the umbrella quietly followed Britain into the age of empire, travel, and global rainstorms. Chapter 7: Empire Under the Umbrella. As the 20th century dawned, Britain stood at the height of its empire, vast, complicated, and occasionally damp. It ruled over territories where the sun supposedly never set, though in practice it often rained anyway. And somehow, through all that expansion, the umbrella followed right along. From the fog of London to the dust of Delhi, from the drizzle of Edinburgh to the monsoons of Singapore. The umbrella, it turned out, was the perfect imperial companion, portable, proper, and endlessly adaptable. British officers, administrators, and travelers carried them across the world, just as they carried their teapots, their table manners, and their deep conviction that everyone else should learn to stand in orderly queues. In old photographs, you can often spot them, stiff men in khaki, posed under the tropical sun, umbrellas raised not against rain but against relentless glare. In the colonies, the umbrella took on new meanings. In India, for instance, it had long been a symbol of authority. Rulers were traditionally shaded by large, ornate parasols as a sign of divine favor. When the British arrived with their neat black umbrellas, it was an almost comic cultural collision, a delicate instrument of drizzle defense meeting a centuries-old emblem of royal power. Over time, though, the British version began to creep into local life. By the late 19th century, Indian gentlemen of the educated elite were carrying London-style umbrellas through Calcutta's monsoon streets, just as their counterparts did along the Thames. And back home, Londoners rather liked this image. It made the umbrella seem cosmopolitan, a little emblem of empire one could hold in one's hand. There was a quiet pride in owning something both utterly mundane and somehow global. The same steel-spoked contraption that shielded a civil servant in Bombay might, on another day, shelter a clerk in Bloomsbury. Manufacturers leaned into that imagery, of course. Umbrella advertisements of the early 1900s were full of colonial flair, palm trees, tropical storms, rugged explorers staring nobly into the distance, umbrella in hand. It was absurd, naturally, but also effective. The umbrella became less about weather and more about identity, the symbol of the well-prepared Englishman, no matter where he found himself. At home, things were changing too. Industrialization had matured, cities were buzzing with electricity, telegraphs, and new ways of being late to work. Umbrellas adapted to this modern rhythm. They became sleeker, lighter, more standardized. Gone were the ornate handles and fussy decorations. The modern umbrella was simple, sturdy, and slightly boring, which, if we're honest, made it more British than ever. By the Edwardian era, umbrella etiquette had mellowed. The absurd precision of Victorian manners softened into something more casual. Men carried them folded under the arm on dry days, not as a symbol of wealth but of readiness. It was the mark of a man who took the world seriously enough to expect it might disappoint him at any moment. Women, too, continued to carry parasols, though by now they were more fashion accessories than necessities. Suntanned skin was slowly becoming stylish, thanks to seaside holidays and the influence of artists who painted people actually enjoying daylight. The parasol's decline was inevitable, but the umbrella? It was immortal. One fascinating byproduct of all this was the rise of the umbrella personality. London newspapers began describing certain types of people based on how they carried one. There was the swagger who swung his umbrella like a cane, the worrier who clutched it in both hands, the absent-minded who left it behind everywhere, and of course the philosopher who never opened it at all, preferring to stroll stoically through the rain in silent contemplation of life's futility. And there were still, always, the umbrella thieves. Despite a century of complaints, nothing had changed. Umbrellas continued to vanish mysteriously from theaters, trains, and tea rooms. A man could buy a brand new one in the morning and lose it by supper. Some Victorians used to joke that there was only one umbrella in London, endlessly passed around from person to person. By the 1900s, this joke had only become truer. If the umbrella had started as a tool of class distinction, by now it had become the great equalizer. Everyone had one. The banker, the postman, the flower seller, all walked under the same rain, under the same canopies. It was perhaps the most democratic object in the British Empire, which is saying something. And yet, in its quiet way, the umbrella retained its symbolism. It was safety, modesty, composure. It represented that peculiarly British refusal to let the weather, or anything else, dictate one's mood. While other nations might embrace storms or seek shelter in cafes, the British preferred to simply continue walking, umbrella up, pretending not to notice. This, too, became cultural shorthand. Cartoonists began to draw the archetypal Englishman, bowler hat, mustache, umbrella, and a faint air of exasperation, and somehow everyone recognized him instantly. The umbrella had become part of the national costume, as inseparable from Britishness as understatement or tea. Of course, there were those who mocked it. Modernists sneered at the umbrella's conservatism, its association with bureaucracy and routine. The poet Ezra Pound once dismissed a dull acquaintance as an umbrella man. But that was exactly the point. The umbrella was dull, practical, unromantic, and therefore perfect. It represented not passion but persistence, not flair but function. Even through wars and social upheaval, the umbrella endured. Soldiers returning from the Boer War carried them home again. Politicians walked into Parliament beneath them. Clerks, clerics, and countless commuters kept theirs propped by the door. London without umbrellas was unthinkable, almost indecent, like imagining Paris without cafes or Venice without water. And so, as the empire stretched across the map, so too did its quiet army of umbrellas. They shaded colonial officials in far-off offices, sheltered explorers on mountain slopes, and poked inconveniently into crowded carriages. They were a small, practical thread connecting London to the rest of the world, the empire's most unassuming export. Let's drift now into the modern age, when the umbrella, long a symbol of propriety and perseverance, would face its greatest challenge yet, the 20th century's obsession with convenience, novelty, and speed. Would the humble canopy survive the age of automobiles and overcoats? Of course it would. This was Britain after all, but not without getting a bit wetter along the way. Chapter 8. The Modern Age of Drizzle. By the time the 20th century had fully settled in, the umbrella was already an old friend, perhaps even an old joke. It had seen monarchs come and go, empires rise and crumble, and yet, there it was, still hanging faithfully by the door. The world was speeding up, cars, electricity, telephones, and the umbrella remained stubbornly slow, a handheld relic in an age of roaring engines and neon light. London, of course, was still raining. That hadn't changed. The fog had thinned, the air a little cleaner now thanks to new regulations and the occasional breeze that managed to push the smoke somewhere else, but the dampness never quite left. London drizzle has a peculiar kind of persistence, not dramatic, not even particularly wet, but ever-present, the kind that seeps gently into your collar while pretending to be harmless. And the umbrella, old and loyal, was still the first line of defense. The early 1900s brought about what one might call the age of standardized style. Fashion became sharper, more uniform, more about efficiency than display. The ornate umbrella handles of the Victorian era vanished. Out went the carved ivory swans and in came the practical, curved wood or metal grips. Black became the only acceptable color for men, because heaven forbid one drew attention to oneself in the street. Umbrella shops still thrived, though now they were tucked between tailors, tobacconists, and hatters, places where a gentleman could outfit his entire existence in matching shades of brown and gray. Owning a good umbrella was still a point of pride, but by this point, it wasn't about status. It was about reliability, like a well-polished shoe or a punctual train. And then came the interwar years, a time when London was tired, fashionable, and slightly anxious. The umbrella became, oddly, a kind of comfort object. In films of the 1920s and 30s, you often see businessmen and detectives clutching them like props of identity. They didn't just keep off rain, they filled empty hands and calmed fidgeting nerves. In the gray urban sprawl of modernity, an umbrella was something familiar, tangible, a little piece of civility one could carry through the chaos. It was also during this time that the umbrella got its most famous publicist, Sir Winston Churchill. Churchill, ever the embodiment of bulldog determination, was rarely seen without one in his younger years. Before he was the cigar-chomping wartime prime minister, he was simply another London gentleman with an umbrella under his arm. The image stuck. To carry an umbrella became a subtle badge of seriousness, a declaration that one was prepared for any weather, literal or political. But not everyone loved the association. Neville Chamberlain, Churchill's less fortunate predecessor, was famously mocked for his umbrella. When he stepped off a plane waving it after meeting Hitler in 1938, the image became iconic, and not in a good way. To some, the umbrella now symbolized appeasement, softness, misplaced optimism. The same object that had once stood for British stoicism was suddenly accused of cowardice. It was an absurd twist of fate for an item that, frankly, had never asked to be political. After the war, though, the umbrella's reputation recovered, slowly, quietly as always. It was too useful to stay controversial for long. Post-war Britain was damp, gray, and rebuilding itself one brick at a time. People needed something simple and steady. The umbrella fit perfectly back into their hands. And then came the mid-century, the 1950s and 60s, an era of shiny cars, synthetic fabrics, and the illusion of progress. The umbrella was still there, unchanged, as though watching it all with mild amusement. While the rest of the world was discovering plastic, it discovered nylon. Umbrellas became lighter, cheaper, and for the first time, mass-produced on a truly global scale. They folded smaller, opened faster, and, crucially, broke sooner. You could buy one at a train station, lose it within a week, and buy another without caring much. The umbrella had gone from treasured companion to disposable accessory. And somehow, that suited the times perfectly. Still, there was one thing that kept it from fading entirely into background noise: personality. In the movies, the umbrella was reborn as a prop of eccentric charm. Mary Poppins floated into London clutching one like a magic wand. Sherlock Holmes' well-to-do clients arrived under them. Even the early James Bond films gave the umbrella a knowing wink, the gentleman's secret weapon, sometimes literally. And then came perhaps the strangest twist in the umbrella's story, the 1960s and 70s, when youth culture decided it didn't need umbrellas at all. Umbrellas were for bankers, for the establishment, for dull men with commutes and receding hairlines. The young and free-spirited preferred to get wet. It was romantic, in a soggy, impractical sort of way. The umbrella briefly became uncool. But like every British institution, it endured by waiting everyone else out. By the 1980s, as Thatcher's London marched briskly into another age of formality and finance, the umbrella was back in its rightful place, folded neatly under the arms of men in suits, black and efficient as ever. Once again, it symbolized composure in a city perpetually one drizzle away from despair. And by this point, the umbrella had achieved something extraordinary: invisibility. It was so ubiquitous, so ordinary, that people stopped noticing it altogether. It was simply there, as inevitable as traffic and tea. Somewhere between nostalgia and necessity, the umbrella had transcended fashion. It wasn't trendy or rebellious. It wasn't even particularly British anymore, though London, of course, still claimed it as its mascot. It was just one of those quiet objects that had followed humanity from powdered wigs to punk rock without ever really changing shape. By the end of the century, the umbrella had become almost philosophical, a small, collapsible monument to endurance. It didn't demand admiration, and it certainly didn't ask for gratitude. It simply kept opening, century after century, against every drizzle, storm, and drizzle again. Let's drift one last time now, toward the present day, to see how this tired old invention still manages to survive in an age of waterproof coats, cheap flights, and people who check the weather on their phones before stepping outside anyway. Chapter 9. The umbrella survives the modern world. By the time the 21st century rolled in, fast, loud, and hopelessly digital, the umbrella had already seen everything. It had survived revolutions, industrial soot, world wars, and the slow decay of manners. And now, it had to endure something even stranger: smartphones, influencers, and people who no longer looked up long enough to notice it was raining. London, of course, hadn't changed much in its essence. Still gray, still moody, still damp in that uniquely poetic way. Rain there doesn't fall so much as exist, a constant misty veil over everything, like the city is permanently halfway through a melancholy novel. And through it all, umbrellas still bloomed like dark flowers over sidewalks. Black, navy, sometimes plaid if someone felt daring. The modern umbrella, though, was now an imposter of its former self. Gone were the sturdy oaken handles and thick silk canopies. Now it was nylon stretched over aluminum, light enough to forget, fragile enough to regret. You could buy one for £5 from a corner shop, watch it turn inside out on your first gusty day, and still somehow feel surprised when it snapped. In a way, that fragility matched the times. Disposable everything. Even your rain protection had an expiration date. Yet the umbrella never vanished. It adapted. It turned itself into a logo, a pattern, a corporate giveaway. It became a prop again, this time for advertising. A walking billboard under gray skies. On the tube, office workers clutched identical collapsible ones, all rattling faintly with metal fatigue. The once personal and proud accessory had become anonymous, but still, it persisted. Because, frankly, nobody had come up with anything better. Of course, modern life also brought a new kind of umbrella user, the multitasker. One hand scrolling, the other holding the handle, sort of. Umbrella collisions became a citywide sport. Crowded streets full of people trying to angle their domes of plastic just enough not to poke each other in the eye. The etiquette of umbrella usage, once a mark of civility, collapsed entirely. There were no more umbrella manners, only chaos, dripping sleeves, and passive-aggressive side glances. Still, for some, the umbrella retained a quiet romance. The kind you see in film, lovers huddling together under one canopy, raindrops pattering softly above as the world blurs in gray behind them. The umbrella in those moments isn't just a tool, it's an excuse. A small tent for two, an instant world of intimacy under the drizzle. Victorian Londoners would have approved, though they'd have insisted on a proper chaperone. Meanwhile, technology tried to intervene. There were self-opening umbrellas, reverse-folding umbrellas, even windproof designs that claimed to resist nature's cruel humor. Some worked, most didn't. There were Bluetooth-connected umbrellas that told you when it might rain, as if the water falling on your head wouldn't. There were even crowdfunding campaigns promising the world's first smart umbrella, which usually ended in spectacular failure. Humanity had split the atom, sent rovers to Mars, but still couldn't make an umbrella that didn't flip inside out on a windy bridge. And yet, that's what people secretly love about it, its imperfection. There's something beautifully human about the umbrella's stubbornness. It doesn't evolve gracefully, it just copes. Like us. Every generation thinks it can improve it, and every generation ends up trudging through the same wet streets, cursing at the same gusts. The umbrella is a reminder that not everything can, or should, be perfected. Some things are meant to remain slightly ridiculous. Even the fashion world had its occasional flirtation with it. Designers like Burberry and Alexander McQueen tried to elevate the umbrella again, turning it into a luxury object, sleek, sculpted, outrageously priced. But at its core, an umbrella still served the same humble purpose it always had, keeping one's hair from becoming tragic. Even the Queen herself was rarely seen without her signature transparent, birdcage, umbrella, practical, visible, and perfectly matching her pastel outfits. A small, regal dome against the British gloom. Tourists, too, learned quickly that in London, an umbrella is not optional. It's survival equipment. The first lesson any visitor learns is that light rain means expect to be damp all day. They crowd souvenir shops and emerge moments later with umbrellas covered in Union Jacks, blissfully unaware that the first strong gust will turn those patriotic canopies into modern art. Londoners, watching from under sturdier models, merely nod in quiet sympathy. But beyond the city, the umbrella had also taken on strange new meanings. In art and photography, it became shorthand for melancholy, a silhouette in the rain, a symbol of waiting, longing, or loneliness. In pop culture, it was everywhere. Songs, films, fashion shoots. It wasn't just about weather anymore, it was about mood. Umbrellas had gone from objects to metaphors. Shelter, isolation, resilience. And through it all, they never stopped multiplying. Every year, millions are lost, in taxis, cafes, and train stations. London alone reportedly loses tens of thousands annually. Somewhere out there, there must be an entire underworld of abandoned umbrellas, tangled together in forgotten corners, their bent spines whispering stories of drizzle and disappointment. It's oddly poetic, really. So here we are, centuries after Jonas Hanway first dared to open his umbrella in public and got laughed at for it. Now, no one blinks. The umbrella has become as invisible as it is indispensable, the quiet companion of modern existence. You don't think about it until it's gone, and then you miss it terribly. And that's perhaps the final twist in the umbrella's story. It began as a symbol of eccentricity, became a mark of civility, then faded into anonymity, yet somehow, it still defines the rhythm of every rainy day. The umbrella has endured not by being remarkable, but by being useful. It is, in essence, the perfect metaphor for human persistence. slightly flawed, constantly collapsing, but always opening again. A small act of defiance against the weather, and perhaps against everything else that tries to drench us along the way. So next time you walk through the London drizzle, or any drizzle, really, and you hear that soft drum of rain above your head, remember, you're holding centuries of quiet stubbornness in your hand. A relic of manners, absurdity, and resilience. An invention too simple to improve, too British to abandon, and too quietly dignified to disappear. And with that, we close our slow, meandering tale of umbrellas, the unsung heroes of every damp commute and every sleepy walk home. Ever patient, ever dripping, ever there. Just like the rain itself. Cloud with Rain. Chapter 10. Umbrellas in a Global Age. By the early 2000s, the umbrella had quietly gone global. London's damp streets were no longer its only home, it was everywhere. Tokyo had them. New York had them. Paris had them. Somewhere, even the sunniest cities kept them tucked into handbags or briefcases, because humans had learned once and for all that weather was unpredictable, inconvenient, and relentless. In a way, the umbrella had become a universal equalizer. Across continents, cultures, and languages, the basic form remained the same. A handle, a canopy, and a stubborn insistence on opening at the wrong moment. Sure, there were variations. Folding umbrellas, automatic ones, oversized golf-sized ones, umbrellas with logos or cartoon characters, but the principle endured. The umbrella is in essence eternal. It doesn't care about trends. It doesn't care about climate change yet. It just shelters quietly and with a small sense of dignity. In cities like Tokyo, umbrellas even gained a subculture. Shops devoted entirely to umbrellas sold them in every color and style imaginable. Transparent canopies became popular for the commuter who wanted to see where they were going without letting rain in. There were special umbrella racks outside every store, organized with precision, reflecting a society obsessed with order. The umbrella was no longer just practical, it was polite, a tool of social cohesion. Meanwhile, the digital age made it slightly ridiculous. You could track your weather app, watch live forecasts, and still forget your umbrella at home. You could spend hours choosing the most technologically advanced, windproof model online, only for it to collapse at the first gust. Some inventors even tried smart umbrellas, Bluetooth-enabled, app-connected, weather alerting. Most failed. The umbrella doesn't want to be smart. It wants to exist, plain and patient, like it always has. In literature and media, the umbrella retained its subtle symbolism. Romantic comedies relied on them as meet-cute props. Noir films used them to cast mysterious shadows over smoky streets. Even cartoons depicted them as weapons, shields, or simply comedic tools. They carried cultural weight precisely because everyone knew what they were, and everyone had experience with their quirks. Lost umbrellas became a global joke too. Airports, train stations, offices, cafes, all became graveyards of abandoned canopies. Entire lost and found departments were devoted to the lonely, forgotten spines and faded fabric. Some of these lost umbrellas were claimed, others vanished forever into the ether. Somewhere in the world, there exists an invisible network of umbrellas, wandering between hands, shelters, and rainstorms. And yet, for all their ordinariness, umbrellas retained a peculiar intimacy. People carry them into elevators, over doorways, across busy streets. They protect hair, clothing, and temper. They are something one holds directly in hand, a tactile reminder that, despite technology, one still contends with the elements. Unlike apps or phones, the umbrella is not abstract. It is physical. It is immediate. It cannot be ignored. In the broader arc of history, the umbrella represents endurance, adaptation, and the quiet human insistence on comfort in an unpredictable world. From Hanway's daring public demonstration in 18th century London to the crowded streets of modern metropolises, it has endured ridicule, theft, and technological obsolescence. Yet it remains, patient, stoic, slightly absurd, but undeniably useful. Even today, When Londoners check their weather apps and sigh at a 50% chance of rain, many still pause to pick up their umbrellas before leaving the house. Tourists marvel at the orderly chaos of umbrella-laden streets. Writers, poets, and photographers continue to capture its shadowy elegance against city lights. And through it all, it remains constant, a quiet witness to the mundane dramas of human life. The umbrella has survived because it is unremarkable, and yet that unremarkableness is its brilliance. It doesn't need praise, and it rarely receives it. It simply works. It shelters. It persists. And in a world constantly obsessed with novelty and speed, that persistence itself is extraordinary. So, as we fold our umbrellas for the night, and let them rest until the next drizzle, we can appreciate a history not of kings or conquests, but of something far quieter, far humbler, the enduring, patient, ever-dripping umbrella. A companion, a shield, a small act of daily resilience that has followed humanity for centuries, and if the rain keeps falling, will likely continue to do so for many more. The rain will fall. The city will remain damp. And the umbrella, ever faithful, ever absurd, ever necessary, will endure. Cloud with rain. This concludes our slow, meandering exploration of umbrellas through history. From eccentric invention to global necessity, we see how even the simplest objects carry layers of social, cultural, and emotional significance, often unnoticed, yet entirely indispensable. Chapter 11: Umbrellas and the Quiet Rituals of Daily Life. Having survived centuries of fashion, empire, war, and urban chaos, the umbrella now occupies a subtle yet enduring role in modern routines. It is rarely the focus of attention, yet it quietly orchestrates the rhythm of daily life. The morning commute, for instance, has become an intricate choreography, umbrellas unfolding simultaneously on crowded sidewalks, avoiding collisions like miniature duels of patience. Londoners, New Yorkers, Tokyoites, and countless others perform this ritual almost unconsciously, guided by instinct and a shared understanding of the canopy's unspoken rules. Even the act of carrying an umbrella has evolved into a kind of social language. A folded umbrella tucked under the arm conveys preparedness, responsibility, and perhaps a hint of anxiety about dampness. One opened mid-street signals vigilance and, occasionally, mild irritation at pedestrians who wander into the path of its ribs. Overhead, it forms a temporary canopy over conversations, a subtle barrier that allows people to interact without fully exposing themselves to the world. The modern umbrella also serves as a tool for subtle expression. Transparent canopies reveal faces and outfits, offering glimpses of identity, while bold colors or patterns convey personality or humor. Even mass-produced black umbrellas, once purely practical, carry echoes of Victorian stoicism, a quiet assertion of composure in an unpredictable world. And as people rush through the drizzle, umbrellas create miniature private spaces, protecting individuals not only from rain but from the sensory overload of crowded streets and digital distractions. Public transport and office life have produced their own umbrella etiquette. Commuters learn, over time, the unspoken rules: avoid flicking water on others, fold quickly when entering a train, and never swing it carelessly in elevators. In workplaces, umbrellas lean against walls like silent sentinels, sometimes lost, sometimes shared, and often overlooked until the next rainstorm summons them into action. Tourists continue to provide amusement and perspective. They may struggle with opening mechanisms, misjudge crowded streets, or purchase absurdly large or tiny umbrellas, yet they too participate in the ritual of urban life. Their interactions highlight how universal the umbrella has become, an object that transcends geography, culture, and language, connecting humans through shared vulnerability to the elements. The umbrella's persistence is also evident in its design evolution. Modern collapsible models fit easily into bags, accommodating the mobile lifestyles of the 21st century. Wind-resistant frames attempt to address gusts that once made Victorian umbrellas curl and collapse. Technological experiments, such as LED-lit tips, automatic openers, and even smart connectivity, have emerged, though often with limited success. Despite innovation, the fundamental form, a handle, a shaft, and a canopy, remains unchanged, a testament to centuries of functional perfection. There is something quietly poetic about this endurance. The umbrella has adapted to industrial cities, global empires, and the digital age while remaining fundamentally the same. It embodies resilience, practicality, and the subtle assertion of control over an unpredictable environment. Its function is mundane, yet its impact is profound. It shapes human behavior, influences social interactions, and provides a small but constant reassurance against the randomness of weather. Even in literature and cinema, the umbrella retains symbolic weight. In romantic scenes, it shelters lovers. In noir, it casts shadows over mystery and intrigue. Cartoons and illustrations use it for comedy, exaggerating its collapses and collisions. In every instance, it is both object and metaphor, protection, propriety, persistence, and occasionally, absurdity. Consider, too, the rituals associated with umbrellas, folding them carefully, leaving them by the door, retrieving them during sudden showers. These small acts punctuate daily life, offering moments of pause and mindfulness. The umbrella mediates between indoors and outdoors, comfort and exposure, civilization and nature. Its presence subtly structures routines, guiding behavior in ways both practical and psychological. The umbrella's quiet omnipresence also speaks to human adaptability. Generations have learned to coexist with rain, wind, and the occasional chaotic gust, adjusting movements, schedules, and expectations accordingly. In this sense, the umbrella is not just an object, it is a participant in human adaptation, a facilitator of urban life, and a symbol of the ordinary yet indispensable aspects of civilization. In summary, the umbrella has evolved from eccentric novelty to fashion statement, from social tool to global necessity, and from practical implement to cultural icon. Its story is not one of dramatic invention or singular genius, but of patient persistence, adaptability, and quiet influence. It demonstrates how simple objects can shape behavior, carry cultural meaning, and endure through centuries of change. Let us now drift, gently, toward the ways in which the umbrella continues to influence culture, art, and human interaction in the present day, a living symbol of resilience in a world that remains unpredictably wet. Chapter 12: The Umbrella as Cultural Symbol. As we settle further into the 21st century, the umbrella has transcended mere practicality to become a subtle yet pervasive cultural symbol. It is present not just in streets and commutes, but in art, photography, and media, where it communicates mood, identity, and social cues without ever speaking a word. The umbrella, in essence, has quietly become a storytelling device, bridging the mundane and the poetic. In urban photography, the umbrella often serves as a frame within a frame. Figures walking beneath dark canopies on rain-slicked streets are instantly recognizable as participants in a shared human experience. The translucent umbrellas, now common in cities like Tokyo and London, reveal faces and interactions, while still maintaining a private bubble, highlighting the tension between public exposure and personal space. In this way, the umbrella mediates not only between people and weather but also between people and each other. Cinema has also embraced the umbrella's narrative potential. From romantic meet-cuties under shared canopies to the brooding silhouettes of detectives in noir streets, umbrellas punctuate storytelling. Their collapses, flips, and collisions provide both comedy and tension, while their simple presence communicates order, preparedness, or resilience. They serve as visual shorthand, conveying character traits or societal norms instantly and silently. In literature, umbrellas appear as metaphors for protection, separation, and endurance. They are often invoked to reflect the unpredictability of life or the quiet persistence of the human spirit. Writers from various cultures have used the umbrella to symbolize shelter against external pressures, the fragility of control, and the rituals humans develop to navigate a capricious world. It is at once mundane and profound, practical and poetic. The umbrella has even found its place in fashion beyond mere utility. Designers continue to experiment with color, shape, and material, transforming it into an accessory capable of personal expression. Transparent canopies maintain visibility while projecting elegance. Oversized models suggest drama, Compact collapsibles blend convenience with subtle flair. While fashion trends ebb and flow, the umbrella persists, adapting to stylistic shifts while remaining fundamentally unchanged in form and function. Social rituals involving umbrellas continue to thrive. The act of offering someone shelter beneath your canopy, carefully folding and storing it after use, or sharing one during a sudden shower maintains social etiquette that has evolved over centuries. These small gestures preserve civility and mutual respect, echoing the conventions of Victorian London even in modern, fast-paced cities. Umbrellas have also become emblematic of environmental awareness in some contexts. Reusable, sustainable materials are now favored, reflecting broader societal concerns about consumption and waste. Yet even as materials evolve, the core purpose, providing shelter and facilitating human movement, remains constant. The umbrella's endurance illustrates the human capacity to innovate without losing touch with the practicalities of daily life. Moreover, the umbrella's universality underscores a shared global experience. Rain, storms, and the need for shelter are constants across cultures, and the umbrella's form is remarkably consistent worldwide. From the narrow alleys of Venice to the bustling avenues of Mumbai, from temperate Europe to tropical Asia, the umbrella unites human experience under a common symbol of protection and resilience. In a sense, the umbrella embodies patience and perseverance. It has witnessed centuries of social change, technological progress, and cultural evolution, adapting quietly to each era while maintaining its core function. Its presence is so natural, so integrated into daily life, that it is often invisible, yet its absence is immediately felt. It is a silent participant in the routines, rituals, and interactions that define human life. As we observe umbrellas in contemporary society, their significance extends beyond weather protection. They are instruments of social order, symbols of identity, and carriers of cultural memory. They remind us that simple objects can influence behavior, sustain traditions, and endure across centuries. Through their continued use, umbrellas testify to humanity's ongoing negotiation with the environment, society, and one another. So, as we close this chapter, we recognize the umbrella not merely as a tool or fashion accessory, but as a quiet cultural icon. It is simultaneously ordinary and profound, practical and symbolic, ubiquitous yet deeply personal. Its story, spanning centuries and continents, reminds us that resilience often takes the simplest forms. Let us now drift gently into the subtler, almost meditative aspects of umbrellas in everyday life. The unnoticed moments, the soft routines, and the quiet reflections that rain and shelter inspire. Chapter 13. Umbrellas in Everyday Reflection. If we take a moment to look closely at the umbrella in modern life, we notice that it often operates on the periphery of consciousness. People rarely admire it, rarely praise it, and rarely think of it beyond the moment of use. Yet, it quietly shapes our interactions, our movements, and even our moods. In some ways, it is less an object and more a participant in daily rhythm, a small agent of order amidst the unpredictability of weather. Consider the morning commute. Office workers emerge from doorways, umbrellas in hand, moving in synchrony with the city. The umbrellas open almost simultaneously, creating a temporary forest of canopies that guides movement and mediates collisions. Pedestrians adjust their pace and path based on the span of another's umbrella, subconsciously negotiating personal space in a compact urban environment. The umbrella has thus become a silent arbiter of civility, a quiet instrument of spatial organization that humans rarely notice until it is absent. Even indoors, umbrellas retain significance. Storing one by the door, checking its integrity before leaving, and carefully folding it upon return are all small rituals. These actions create order, mark transitions between environments, and subtly reinforce discipline and preparedness. In a fast-paced modern world, these minor routines provide a comforting structure. The umbrella quietly participates in the rituals that organize human life, linking indoor comfort to outdoor unpredictability. The umbrella also carries an emotional resonance. A shared umbrella can foster intimacy, a brief, protective canopy over two people walking side by side, a physical shield that encourages closeness. It can serve as a metaphor in literature, film, and photography, representing connection, care, or protection. Conversely, a broken or lost umbrella can evoke mild frustration or inconvenience, subtly affecting mood and behavior. Through these experiences, umbrellas become more than tools. They carry personal and social meaning. In urban spaces, umbrellas create temporary microenvironments. Streets transform under rainfall, sidewalks become dotted with moving shelters. Transparent umbrellas allow visibility, maintaining awareness while offering shelter. Dark or patterned canopies provide privacy, creating a momentary retreat within the public sphere. The umbrella mediates the tension between exposure and protection, public and private, comfort and vulnerability. Culturally, umbrellas continue to convey symbolic weight. They signal preparedness, civility, and composure. They are associated with British stoicism, with urban resilience, with quiet dignity. Fashion adaptations allow umbrellas to express personality, yet they remain fundamentally practical. Across societies, umbrellas are instantly recognizable objects that communicate much without words. They are tools of survival, symbols of patience, and instruments of subtle etiquette. Technology has introduced novelty, yet the essence of the umbrella persists. Automatic openers, compact folding mechanisms, and synthetic fabrics improve convenience but do not alter the underlying function. The umbrella remains a bridge between humans and the elements, a device whose form and purpose have endured largely unchanged for centuries. Its longevity demonstrates the capacity of simple, practical inventions to adapt across eras without losing identity. In moments of reflection, the umbrella reminds us of human persistence. It endures wind, rain, and misuse. It adapts to new materials, cultures, and technologies. It persists even when unappreciated. Its story mirrors human resilience, enduring, adapting, and quietly facilitating life through centuries of change. Each fold, each opening, each drip of rain on its canopy marks a continuity of experience, small, unnoticed, but profoundly consistent. The umbrella, then, is more than a mere accessory. It is a companion, a mediator, and a silent participant in human history. It shapes movement, behavior, and interaction. It shelters, organizes, and comforts. And perhaps most importantly, it endures, quietly reminding us that some of the simplest, most unassuming inventions can have the longest, most meaningful impact on human life. As we drift through the subtle hum of urban drizzle, let us recognize the umbrella for what it truly is: a constant presence, a patient observer, and a humble testament to endurance. Through centuries and across continents, it has weathered both storms and indifference, quietly maintaining its role in the rituals, routines, and reflections of daily life. Let us now move gently toward the final chapters of this story, where umbrellas meet the contemporary world in all its complexity, technology, urbanity, and cultural symbolism converging under the canopy of centuries-old resilience. Chapter 14: Umbrellas and Technology, Adapting to a New World. As we continue through the 21st century, the umbrella faces new challenges, not from rain or wind, but from the rapid pace of technological change. Smartphones, apps, and weather forecasts have altered how people interact with the environment. Rain is no longer a surprise. It is predicted, measured, and displayed on digital screens. Yet, despite all this, the umbrella remains indispensable, perhaps more subtly so, quietly bridging tradition and modernity. Modern umbrellas are lighter, more compact, and designed with convenience in mind. Collapsible models fit into briefcases or handbags, accommodating the mobile lifestyles of city dwellers. Windproof frames attempt to resist gusts that once turned Victorian umbrellas inside out. Materials like nylon and aluminum replace silk and steel, reducing weight but sometimes sacrificing durability. The umbrella evolves technologically, yet its basic function, to provide shelter, remains unchanged. Attempts to make smart umbrellas highlight the intersection of tradition and innovation. Some models claim Bluetooth connectivity, automatic weather alerts, or GPS tracking for lost umbrellas. Many of these inventions fail commercially, revealing the paradox of the umbrella. It is at once simple and irreplaceable, resistant to over-engineering. Humans will always need it, even if technology tries to make it smarter, faster, or more interactive. The umbrella's endurance is also cultural. In photography, it continues to signify mood and setting. A lone figure beneath a dark canopy conveys introspection, solitude, or quiet dignity. In cinema, umbrellas frame romance, mystery, and humor, providing both function and symbolism. Transparent umbrellas offer visibility while maintaining a sense of privacy, creating a balance between exposure and shelter that resonates across urban life. Even in public transport, umbrellas maintain social function. Commuters navigate crowded sidewalks, trains, and stations, often coordinating subconsciously to avoid collisions. Umbrella etiquette has adapted to new norms, folding quickly, avoiding water spillage, and maintaining awareness of others' personal space. In this way, umbrellas mediate behavior, shaping social interaction as much as protecting from rain. Retail and fashion continue to reflect the umbrella's dual role as practical tool and stylistic statement. Designer umbrellas blend durability with aesthetics, while mass-produced models prioritize affordability and convenience. Color, pattern, and transparency provide avenues for personal expression, even as the fundamental form remains unchanged. The umbrella becomes an accessory that communicates subtle cues about personality, preparedness, and taste. In urban life, the umbrella also serves as a momentary refuge. A canopy shields from rain, wind, or glaring sun, creating a small private space in public environments. This microshelter provides comfort, autonomy, and control, qualities increasingly valued in dense, fast-paced cities. It allows individuals to navigate unpredictable weather while maintaining composure, reinforcing routines and rhythms that structure daily life. From a historical perspective, this persistence is remarkable. The umbrella has survived centuries of changing fashion, industrialization, global expansion, wars, and technological revolutions. Its design remains largely consistent, a testament to functional perfection and adaptability. It is unassuming, ubiquitous, and remarkably resilient. The umbrella's story mirrors human resilience, the capacity to endure, adapt, and maintain order in a chaotic world. Ultimately, the umbrella embodies both practicality and symbolism. It shelters, organizes, and mediates. It communicates civility, preparedness, and subtle cultural identity. It adapts to new technologies without losing essence, reminding us that some simple tools are indispensable because they fulfill both practical and psychological needs. As we continue, let us drift into the final contemplations of the umbrella's role in contemporary society, a meditation on endurance, subtlety, and the quiet rhythms of life that these unassuming objects continue to uphold. Chapter 15. The umbrella as a symbol of endurance. As we approach the present moment, it becomes clear that the umbrella's story is not merely about shelter from rain. It is a story of endurance, adaptation, and quiet persistence. For centuries, this simple object has accompanied humans through both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances, witnessing social change, technological innovation, and cultural evolution. Its longevity is remarkable precisely because it does not demand attention. It persists quietly, unassuming, yet indispensable. The umbrella's endurance is practical as well as symbolic. It survives wind, sun, rain, and misuse. It folds, unfolds, and adapts to human hands, city streets, and unpredictable weather. In this way, the umbrella mirrors human life, flexible, imperfect, and constantly negotiating with forces beyond its control. People may mock it, lose it, or forget it, yet it remains, reliably providing protection and a subtle structure to daily routines. Culturally, the umbrella continues to signify civility, preparedness, and composure. In urban photography, it frames moments of quiet reflection. In literature and cinema, it represents intimacy, solitude, or resilience. Transparent umbrellas allow visibility while maintaining a private space. Dark umbrellas convey formality or stoicism. Across contexts, umbrellas communicate social cues, mediate interactions, and influence behavior, all while remaining fundamentally simple. Even as technology advances, the umbrella persists. Modern materials, collapsible designs, and automatic mechanisms provide convenience, but the core function remains unchanged. Attempts to smartify the umbrella, Bluetooth connectivity, GPS alerts, or digital weather integration often fail, highlighting a paradox. The umbrella's strength lies in its simplicity. Humans need it, not because it is high-tech, but because it fulfills a timeless need to navigate unpredictability with calm and composure. The umbrella also participates in personal and social rituals. Folding it carefully after use, offering shelter to another, or simply carrying it as one moves through the city are acts of mindfulness, etiquette, and shared understanding. It is a subtle instrument of social cohesion, shaping human behavior as much as protecting against the elements. Historically, the umbrella reflects continuity and change. From Jonas Hanway's eccentric 18th-century London demonstrations to contemporary commuters in megacities, it has adapted to shifting fashions, technological advancements, and cultural contexts. Its form, largely unchanged, demonstrates functional perfection, while its use evolves to meet the needs of each generation. Symbolically, the umbrella embodies resilience. It survives storms and gusts, social ridicule, and cultural shifts. It shelters humans physically and metaphorically, providing a sense of control in an unpredictable environment. Its quiet reliability contrasts sharply with modern life's rapid pace and technological complexity, offering a small, constant comfort amidst change. The umbrella's endurance is a meditation on simplicity and utility. It does not demand attention, yet its absence is felt keenly. It is both ordinary and profound, humble and essential. Its presence in daily life connects humans to centuries of shared experience, offering a tangible link to history, culture, and social norms. As we contemplate the umbrella in contemporary society, we see that it is more than an object. It is a participant in human life, a facilitator of interaction, and a symbol of quiet perseverance. Its continued use reminds us that even the simplest tools can shape behavior, mediate social order, and endure across centuries of change. In the end, the umbrella is a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability. It has weathered centuries of fashion, cultural shifts, urbanization, and technological change. It remains relevant, functional, and quietly indispensable, bridging the practical and the symbolic. In its unassuming persistence, the umbrella teaches a subtle lesson. Endurance is often less about grandeur and more about quietly fulfilling a need, reliably, day after day, drizzle after drizzle. Let us now, gently, drift toward the reflections on the umbrella's place in human imagination, art, and the continuing rituals that sustain its quiet significance. Chapter 16. The Umbrella in Imagination and Art. The tactile quality of umbrellas contributes to their emotional role. The weight in the hand, the motion of opening and closing, and the sound of raindrops on fabric all provide sensory feedback that anchors humans in the present moment. In this way, the umbrella functions as both shield and interface, a physical object that mediates experience, emotion, and interaction. Modern design innovations, collapsible frames, automatic mechanisms, wind-resistant structures, enhance convenience but rarely diminish emotional impact. In fact, lightweight, portable umbrellas can increase the sense of readiness, enhancing confidence in navigating unpredictable environments. Even in technology-driven societies, this simple object remains an emotional touchstone, linking routine action to comfort, anticipation, and care. The umbrella's psychological influence extends to memory and nostalgia. People often recall rainy walks, shared moments beneath a canopy, or the frustration of a snapped umbrella. These experiences, mundane in isolation, accumulate as subtle markers of life, contributing to the texture of personal and cultural memory. Through these layers, the umbrella becomes more than shelter. It is a repository of lived experience and emotional resonance. Ultimately, the umbrella exemplifies how ordinary objects can shape emotional life. It mediates vulnerability, facilitates care, and provides comfort. Its presence alters perception, mood, and behavior, revealing that utility and emotional significance need not be separate. The umbrella quietly teaches that resilience and preparedness, both practical and emotional, can reside in the simplest, most unassuming forms. As we move forward, let us drift toward the umbrella's role in communal and societal rituals, the ways it structures group behavior, etiquette, and shared human experience under rain, drizzle, and overcast skies. Chapter 18. Umbrellas in Society and Ritual. The umbrella's influence extends beyond the individual, shaping social interactions and communal routines. Its presence structures behavior in public spaces, subtly enforcing etiquette and coordination. Crowded streets, train stations, and marketplaces become orchestrated environments, guided by the careful navigation of open and folded canopies. Pedestrians adjust pace, trajectory, and spacing, negotiating shared space in ways that are largely unconscious but highly effective. In many cultures, umbrella etiquette has evolved into a social ritual. Opening or closing an umbrella requires consideration of others, whether on sidewalks, in doorways, or on public transport. Collisions are avoided, water is contained, and privacy is respected. These small acts of care reinforce civility, mutual respect, and shared understanding. The umbrella thus functions as an instrument of social cohesion, mediating both space and interaction. Shared umbrellas, in particular, carry symbolic weight. Offering shelter to another person is a gesture of kindness, intimacy, or solidarity. Couples, friends, and even strangers may momentarily inhabit a small shared space, protected from the elements. These microshelters facilitate connection while simultaneously structuring physical boundaries, creating a delicate balance between closeness and autonomy. Urban life amplifies these dynamics. In cities with unpredictable weather, umbrellas coordinate movement, manage personal space, and reduce conflict. Pedestrians subconsciously form patterns to accommodate open canopies, while folded umbrellas stored in public spaces signal readiness and consideration. In this way, the umbrella shapes routines, interactions, and even civic harmony. Communal rituals surrounding umbrellas extend to cultural events, festivals, and ceremonies. Traditional paper umbrellas in Japan, for instance, play ceremonial roles, symbolizing elegance, formality, and artistic heritage. In Western societies, umbrellas have historically conveyed civility and social status, particularly in periods when public behavior was more heavily codified. Across contexts, umbrellas mediate not only environmental exposure but social expectations. The umbrella also functions in collective memory. Images of rain-soaked streets, parades of umbrellas, or shared moments beneath canopies resonate as cultural touchstones. They encapsulate communal experience, linking individuals to broader narratives of urban life, seasonal change, and social interaction. Even mundane practices, folding umbrellas after use, returning them to racks, or sharing them temporarily, contribute to collective routines that define community life. In addition, umbrellas facilitate inclusivity. By providing shelter to groups, they allow participation in public activities despite adverse weather. Festivals, markets, parades, and outdoor events remain accessible, reinforcing communal engagement. The simple act of carrying an umbrella thus becomes a subtle enabler of social continuity, linking practicality with collective experience. Modern innovations have slightly altered these social dynamics. Compact, collapsible umbrellas allow discrete storage, reducing the spatial footprint in crowded areas. Transparent designs maintain visibility in group movement, while sturdier windproof frames minimize disruptions. Despite technological improvements, the umbrella's social function, mediating space, behavior, and civility, remains intact. Through centuries and across cultures, the umbrella has consistently structured public behavior and reinforced social norms. It is an unassuming arbiter of etiquette, a mediator of personal and collective space, and a facilitator of shared human experience. Its presence encourages mindfulness, consideration, and coordination, quietly shaping urban life without overt authority. In essence, the umbrella is both practical and cultural. It protects individuals, guides interactions and sustains communal rituals. Its role in society demonstrates how even the simplest objects can influence behavior, foster civility, and reinforce social cohesion. Through daily use, it quietly integrates into the rhythms, routines, and shared experiences that define human communities. Let us now drift gently toward the umbrella's continuing role in contemporary culture, where tradition, technology, and everyday life intersect beneath the canopy of modern urban existence.